Good afternoon, everyone. It is Thursday, March 12th, 2026. It is approximately 3:05 p.m., and I am calling this meeting of the Senate Elections Committee to order, and we do have a quorum. I want to welcome everyone in the audience to the Minnesota Senate Elections Committee. We do appreciate your interest and participation in the legislative process. To ensure everyone can see, hear, and understand today's proceedings, we ask for your cooperation in maintaining decorum and civility throughout this hearing. For the safety and security and comfort of all attendees, please note the following guidelines. As the acting chair of the Elections Committee, my job is to make sure our committee runs smoothly and efficiently and to ensure we are able to complete our business each time we meet. My job is also to establish expectations around conduct during our hearing as follows. Signs and placards are not permitted in the hearing room. Verbal outbursts, shouting, or disruptive behavior will not be tolerated. Applause or other audible demonstrations are not allowed. For safety reasons, everyone must be seated. No standing, sitting, or pacing in the walkways or aisles will be allowed, nor standing or obstructing proceedings at your seat. However, if you require a reasonable accommodation, please speak with our sergeant staff for assistance with your needs. Sergeant-at-Arms are here to ensure everyone's safety. Testifiers have signed up in advance and have been provided with a time limit for their testimony. Please adhere to these limits so that all of our testifiers have the opportunity to share their thoughts and so that we can keep our meeting on time. If time runs out, I will ask you to wrap up your remarks. Before and after the committee, please talk to a sergeant if you would like to speak with a senator or a member of our staff instead of approaching the committee table. The sergeant will then let us know. If these guidelines are not followed, I will provide a warning and ask that decorum be restored. After that, ongoing failure to comply may result in removal from the hearing room. Our goal is to conduct these proceedings efficiently while ensuring everyone the opportunity to observe and participate appropriately and to maintain decorum. One other item of note, I have been sharing this in each hearing, but just as a reminder, except for authors' amendments, we will have roll call for all votes since some members are participating remotely. There are two items on our agenda today. The first item is Senate File 4196, which is Senator Port's bill. This is Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board to impose fees and civil penalties for various violations. I understand, Senator Port, that you do have an A2 amendment. Would you like to move that first before you speak to your bill?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, that I have an A2 author's amendment.
All those in favor of adopting the author's A2 amendment, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. The A2 author's amendment is adopted. Please present your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. The bill in front of you seeks to reform and modernize the Campaign Finance Board's penalty structure by both increasing overall penalties and by making certain fines and civil penalties mandatory. We heard on Tuesday about the massive increase in campaign spending over the last decade since Citizens United, and most of these fines have not been updated since that time. To accomplish our goals in this bill, we establish a new threshold of an enhanced penalty, which applies to violations over $25,000 or $250,000, depending on the case, which prohibits the CFB from waiving any fees or penalties over those thresholds. Enhanced penalties are designed to scale with the size of the violation, as opposed to applying a flat dollar penalty. The bill also applies enhanced penalties to existing violations, which include willful or knowing errors of misinformation, regardless of the dollar amount of the violation. Other penalties for violations below those thresholds may still be waived or reduced according to the CFB's discretion. These changes are mostly intended to address large actors who routinely see current fines and fees as sort of the cost of doing business. Notably, this bill requires that all campaign finance fees and penalties be deposited in the state elections campaign account as opposed to the current standard of the general fund. The state elections campaign account funds the public subsidy via an open appropriation. And that goal is to help increase candidates' voices, which are increasingly drowned out with the large amounts of outside money. With that, Madam Chair, I can walk through the changes that are in the bill. Section 1 provides a definition of the enhanced penalty. It is a late fee or civil penalty imposed by the board that applies after a $25,000 or $250,000 threshold is exceeded or is determined using a multiplier or percentage under the sections of this bill. In Section 2, it provides a definition of total contributions. Section 3 is total disbursements. Section 4 prohibits the board from waiving any portion of an enhanced penalty. And that is where deposits into the state elections campaign account in the special revenue fund instead of the general fund. Section 5 requires the board to impose a civil penalty on a person who violates the provision on false statements. For reports that include contributions and disbursements, the penalty is 4 times the sum of the amounts that were knowingly or falsely omitted. The beginning cash balance, total contributions, and total disbursements, all of those can be potential areas of fines. And for all other reports, the penalty is up to $3,000. In Section 6, we require the board to impose a civil penalty on a person who knowingly violates the record-keeping provision. The civil penalty is an amount equal to 4 times the amount reflected on the missing record. In Section 7, we require the board to impose a civil penalty on a person who willfully fails to report a material change or correction. And that includes contributions and disbursements. And again, the penalty is 4 times the amount required of the required change or correction. In Section 8, we require the board to impose a civil penalty on a person who willfully fails to cooperate with the board to reconcile a discrepancy, and that amount is equal to 4 times the discrepancy. In Section 9, we provide that when a violation of the provision on non-compliant independent expenditures is intentional, the board must impose a civil penalty of 10 times the amount of the independent expenditure. In Section 10, we provide that if a report filed with the board reflects total contributions or total expenditures of more than $25,000 that were not disclosed due to a late registration statement, the board must impose a late filing fee of 10% of that total per day, starting on the day the report was due. In Section 11, we provide that total contributions or disbursements on specified reports exceed $250,000 or were required to be disclosed for the first time exceed $25,000. Again, the board must impose a late fee of 10% of the total contributions, whichever is greater, that should have been reported per day. Section 12 is deleted by the A2 amendment. Section 13 provides that if an association violates the provision on failure to register and the total contributions during the election exceed $25,000, the board must impose a civil penalty on an amount of 4 times the amount contributed to all committees, funds, or party units in the election segment. And finally, Section 13 provides an individual or association that violates the law on circumvention is subject to a civil penalty up to 4 times the contribution. And this bill is effective January 1st, 2027.
Thank you, Senator Port. I will ask first if we have any amendments for Senator Port's bill. I don't see any. So we will now open this up for any potential testimony, and I don't know that anyone is testifying, but I understand Mr. Sigurdson is on deck in case we have questions that he can answer.
Correct.
So let's open it up for member discussion. Senator Curran.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Port. I'm not against penalties to correct behavior. of all the categories, where are the trends, where are the trends that we see in that non-compliance? Because I'm a little bit worried about taking, right, the mandatories from a campaign finance board perspective, but where are the trends that, we've seen trends in dollars given, but where are the trends in the non-compliance in campaign finance?
Senator Port.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Coran. I am going to ask Mr. Sigurdson to come up because some of those they report, some of them they don't. So like seeing the trends from sort of their whole view is helpful.
Mr. Sigurdson.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Jeff Sigurdson. I'm with the Executive Director of the Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board. I did grab a report of late fees and civil penalties applied in fiscal year 25. And I did note, it may have taken me just a second to find it. I was looking for the fault certification. I know that there has been fault certification findings here. I'm sorry, just a second here. Right, and we had one fault certification for a independent expenditure committee, well, actually two for an independent expenditure committee, and then also a failure to keep records for that same independent expenditure committee. Each one of those was a $3,000 fine, so about $9,000 there. In terms of late filing fees, principal campaign committees in 2025, again, the last full year, there was only 20 that were late, or I should say that were fined for being late. Political committees and funds, 43 had late reports. Party units had 15. I'm not saying that all of those would have fallen under the heading of the enhanced penalty of over 25,000 or over 250, but that gives you at least some idea of the number of late reports we're dealing with.
Madam Chair.
Senator Coran.
Mr. Sigurdson, so of the, and are they chronic, of those that are in non-compliance, have the actions that the board has taken resolve the issues that you've identified, or those that even warranted a fine? Or do we have a chronic group of people, the same people, and or do we just see chronic non-compliance and say IEs versus just candidate campaign filings or disclosures?
Mr. Sigurdson.
Madam Chair, Senator Cran, I would not say that we've seen chronic comparing candidates to political committees or party units. At least I don't think there's a pattern there where one group is more chronic in being late than others. I would say that there are some chronic late filers, and I may just now contradict what I just now said. I think sometimes very small candidate committees where the candidate is trying to determine if they're even going to run again, sometimes they're kind of chronic and filing late. But I wouldn't say that I see a distinct pattern between, for example, party units and political committees.
Thank you, Madam
Senator
Chair.
Coran.
And thank you, Mr. Sigurdson and Senator Port. I'm still looking for the, we still don't see the cause, right? The foundational piece, because again, I think the penalties at work, we got to get them taken care of. I think that we all see candidates on that side of it. Toughest position to fill is the treasurer. And so as long as the penalties fit, and I am a little bit worried, and I guess it would be interesting to see what the board thinks of campaign finance. Did they approach you that they said we need more tools? Did anybody from the board approach you that we need more tools, or what we have is insufficient?
Senator Port.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Coran. I think in this case, I don't know, we've been working on this for a couple of years. So I think we brought it to them and then have gone back and forth a number of times to figure out the right places to increase these penalties. I will say especially at that, like, you know, towards the end of an election, if it's not, you know, not filing a report, and then people vote, and it's not until a late report is filed that voters have any idea who was spending potentially huge sums of money in our elections. A $3,000 fine doesn't solve that. It's just the cost of doing business. And Like, that's okay. They're willing to, if they're spending $2 million, a $3,000 fine is nothing. And so I do think, as we are having more and more IEs pour into Minnesota, and that spending is going up so much, making sure that voters that there is an incentive for folks to file online so voters can track who is spending money, it becomes more and more critical. And if the fine is, so inconsequential, it's, for the most part, this is not targeted at regular candidates who are, maybe left off accidentally a donation or two, and it's a reconciliation thing. It is knowingly, and where we are talking about large sums of money.
Senator Cran.
Chair and Senator Porton, yeah, and I think our fix-it bill that we passed last week had one of those periods, I think, from Mr. Sigurdsson about a collective full election cycle reporting period where if dollars were collected prior to a date, weren't reported. And we all understand and agree with you that the importance of that late filing and the dollars, because I think the largest fine imposed, $100,000, was 2012, right? The DFL party, and it was your words, and we believe the same thing. It was just cost of doing business, because it doesn't change the election, and it likely would have. So I'm still not here the strongest. I think you're trying to get to the preventative side, make it heavy-handed. We just can't have our smallest candidates, right, that are just clamoring to participate in the process, that can't find a treasurer. We can't make it so punitive that also scares them away. So thank you.
Senator Port, any?
I'll just say these are for larger sums of money or for knowingly and willfully obfuscating the process. And so I share your concern about small candidates, and we've tried to be really thoughtful and intentional with where we put these enhanced penalties.
Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Port, as I understand it, this provision would, as you have stated, would focus on those that would knowingly or willfully make a false statement on their report. I get that. I have a concern that we're being very prescriptive about penalties on this. If there is any violation, there is no discretion, according to this bill, for the board to adjust a penalty. It has to be what's written. So you've taken the words may, wherever it's been found in existing law, and changed the word to must. As I compare this to, let's say, a judicial finding of guilt, we allow judges a discretion to impose the penalty within a range. And I'm kind of wondering why you didn't recognize that type of a model where the board could, let's say, a first offense, or perhaps there was a confusion between candidate and treasurer and how to describe an expense or a donation. I suppose that would be based on proving whether it was willful or knowingly, but nevertheless, I can see where there'd be a gray area somewhere, and having an absolute sentence and the absolute penalty is also prescribed. I just find that we're kind of getting rid of the proportionality of the penalty. And I was wondering if you could explain to me why you're going in this direction.
Senator Port.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question, Senator Limmer. I'm happy to. We only made that for the enhanced penalties. That was the only place where we took away that ability for the board's discretion. If the board finds that they willingly and knowfully made the decision to file a report that omits something, or they lied on their report, or they chose to do it late in order to miss a deadline. Those are the cases in which those penalties are set. In all other cases, the board maintains its discretion. So it is only once you have passed that like willful choice, and the board finds that they have enough evidence to say that it was willful, that's the only time in which those enhanced penalties come into play.
Senator Limmer?
This question would be for Mr. Sigurdson. Mr. Sigurdson, in your experience, do you find it easy to prove whether an action is willful and knowingly done? Or does the board find difficulty in finding that conclusion?
Mr. Sigurdson?
Madam Chair, Senator Limmer, because the board can only deal with civil penalties, it uses the preponderance of the evidence standard, which means that it's more likely than not that something is true. I will say that the board is very cautious because of its understanding of, one, the role of volunteers, but also, frankly, the ability of the board's findings to discredit a candidate, that it's very cautious in concluding that there was a willful violation. Nonetheless, as I mentioned, that does occasionally occur. We do find cases where it was clear from the records that they were aware that the report was incomplete, and there was no reasonable conclusion other than it was knowingly left off a report. So it's not a conclusion that the board comes to lightly, but with an examination of the records, occasionally putting someone under oath to take testimony, we're able to determine that in the great majority of cases.
Senator Limmer?
None for now.
Okay, we are on to Senator Bolden.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Port, for bringing this bill. I wanted to just touch on something that you mentioned before, that I appreciate this bill is not aimed at, pulling in, candidates who are, making mistakes, or, treasurers who are often volunteers, who are, made an inadvertent error, sort of like these little things that can happen. We're humans, and that happens from time to time. That is not the point of this. It really is getting at those big actors. And as we have had much conversation about the growing dollars that are spent in our elections, and there are some very big players in that. My understanding is that these, penalties and fines and whatnot have not been updated for some time. And so, for instance, the current penalty for a late filing is $50 a day. I mean, that's, for some of these big players who are spending, big dollars, $50 a day, I'm sure is just sort of the price of doing business. And so it makes sense to me to just update and sort of bring current the dollar amounts to really reflect sort of the environment that we are in now, and that our elections are in right now. Though, I wish it was not the level of dollars that were spent in our elections, but here we are, right? And so I think this makes sense. And to have, in terms of the taking away a bit of the discretion for the board, in certain cases where it is, willful, knowingly making these errors, I think having the predictability and consistency to know, if you do this, this is what it is, I think is also helpful. So thank you for bringing this bill.
Thank you, Senator. And next we have Senator Barr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question's on the effective date. So we have an open governor's race, we have an open U.S. Senate race. Here in Minnesota, we're going to see an unusually large amount of money spent this election cycle between the two sides combined, or all the candidates combined. The effective date's January 27. How does that work with this election cycle? Isn't that kind of like checking after the cows left the barn? I mean, shouldn't we maybe have this the 1st of July if you want it done? Just a question.
Senator Port.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Barr. We usually try to make changes to existing campaign finance law begin to start at the beginning of the next cycle, so it's not changing the rules kind of halfway through. I don't disagree with you. Maybe Mr. Sigurdson has a different opinion on that, and the ability to get this information out to candidates and IEs and all that, but that is certainly something that I am open to having a conversation about.
Mr. Sigurdson, do you have an opinion on that?
Madam Chair, members, not an opinion, I would just say, obviously, regardless of the effective date, the board will do an outreach to registered committees and funds and party units, that there's been a significant change here, and we can obviously focus from our database on those that are likely to be over the 25,000 or 250,000 threshold to make sure that they're aware of it.
Senator Barr?
I'm good.
Okay. Senator Marty?
Madam Chair, I wanted to comment on a couple of things, but I'm going to start with the one Senator Barr had, and I know that the big play, I really appreciate the way the bill is structured, like you took out the thing for inactive committees. That's not what this is after, and the fact that you're leaving the regular penalties reasonably low. And then for the ones who are knowing and willfully doing this, you're making sure it's just not a cost of doing business, as you said. So I think that's all very helpful. And the big players in this, if they are knowingly and willfully doing it, when we have criminal law, I mean, we do budget things effective July 1st, but criminal law, if we don't have anything else, we do it August 1st. So there's chance for people to learn the law changed. And in this case, it's not our next door neighbors or people like that who are going to be trapped in it. It's people who are professionally trained in doing this in very sophisticated ways. So unless the author strongly objects, I'd like to move the effective date be August 1st of 2026.
Senator Port?
I do not strongly object.
So I'm hearing perhaps an oral amendment to the bill. Ms. Stengel?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Senator Marty. I believe you could just move to, on page 8, delete section 15, because the default effective date of this bill would be August 1st.
So move, delete section 15.
Okay, any discussion on the oral amendment? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it.
Good idea.
Any other discussion on the bill? Senator Port, any closing remarks?
Members, I think as we continue to see increases in the amount of money that's spent in elections, transparency is one of the few things that we can help to control. Letting voters have opportunities to be able to follow along with reports and see disclosures and all of those things is one of the few things we can do to at least help voters understand who's spending in our elections. And I think making sure that those reports are filed on time and they contain the actual information that's necessary is a key piece of that work. So I thank the committee for its time.
Thank you, Senator Port. All right. So at this time, Senator Port moves that Senate File 4196 as amended be recommended to pass and referred to the Judiciary Committee.
Do I have to, Madam Chair?
Yes, yes, I'm afraid you do.
Okay.
And we shall look forward to seeing you there, Senator Limmer and I. So Ms. Stankiewicz will take the roll.
Senator Westland,
Aye.
Senator Curran,
Aye.
Senator Carlson, Senator Carlson,
Aye.
Senator Barr, Senator Bolden,
Aye.
Senator Cwodzinski,
Yes.
Senator Limmer,
Aye.
Senator Lucero, Senator Marty, Senator Matthews, Senator Port.
Aye.
All right, there being 11 ayes and 0 nays, the Senate File 4196 as amended is recommended to pass and is referred to the Judiciary Committee. All right. Next, we have Senate File 4135, Senator Cwodzinski. Would you please, actually, I understand you also have an amendment that,
I do, the A3.
and would you like to move that first before you discuss your bill?
Sure.
All right. Senator Cwodzinski would like to move the A3DE Author's Amendment, which was posted earlier today, to get the bill into the form he desires. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. The A3 Author's Amendment is adopted. Senator Cwodzinski, please present your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The A3 amendment, first of all, just re-emphasizes some of the catches that our wonderful staff caught, and so reorganizes the bill, makes some technical changes, things like that I'm sure you guys are going to talk about. But the reason I'm so excited about this bill, however, is we've got a situation happening in our country right now with the demise of local newspapers and who's going to replace them when it comes to time to inform the voters about the responsibilities coming up in the next election, and a forum, if you will, for candidates to say what's on their mind. And when the local newspaper in my community in Eden Prairie went out of business a couple years ago, my heart went out immediately to my challengers, because it's kind of easy for incumbents to get their message out. But how can a challenger get their information out in letters and ads if there's no local newspaper anymore to put those things in? So when I found out that the Secretary of State's office was following the leads of 32 other states and coming out with a voter's guide, I kind of got excited when I heard about this bill, because you know, democracy dies in darkness, and I know there's a physical cost, and we'll talk about that, but I don't know if we can put a dollar value on elections and voting and democracy. And one of the things I love about this bill is, and I'm sure you guys are going to talk about this as well, but in the voter's guide, you can only talk to your strengths as a candidate. You can't attack the weaknesses of your opponent. And I think if democracy is going to continue over the next 250 more years, I'd like to see us move away from attacking each other and focusing on each other's strengths. And I think that's how our nation will be built stronger and better for our descendants. So with that said, I think this bill strengthens our democracy in ways that hopefully are unimaginable to us. And so I'll take it away. I have two testifiers.
All right. Our first testifier is Jonah Rothstein.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Please state your name for the record and present your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jonah Rothstein, Office of the Secretary of State. Thank you for the opportunity to present on Senate File 4135, which establishes a Minnesota Voter Information Guide to be published by the Office of the Secretary of State. And thank you to Senator Cwodzinski for authoring the bill. This presentation will go through particular aspects of how we envision a voter information guide could look in Minnesota. And following the presentation, I will be available along with Ms. Freeman to answer your questions.
Proceed.
Thank you. In 2024 and 2025, the office conducted a voter study. And during that process, the office heard from Minnesotans that they are seeking more information about candidates for office at all levels. Minnesota has the benefit of not being the first state to do a voter guide. As Senator Cwodzinski mentioned, 32 states offer some form of a voter information guide for their citizens prior to even-year general elections. All of these guides include basic information on voting, including who is eligible, where they can vote and when, and which offices are on the ballot. Most state voter guides also include candidates for office and give them the opportunity to talk about themselves in their own words, brief candidate statements, along with a few basic biographical questions. As you can see on the slide here, Minnesota is in a minority of states, 18 and the District of Columbia, that do not offer a voter information guide. While the Office of the Secretary of State and local election officials do offer a plethora of information online to our voters, we do not have a single product that is distributed to all registered voters. As you can see on the map, states in white do not offer a voter guide. States shaded in blue offer a PDF online voter guide. States in green offer an online navigable webpage voter guide. States in red offer both an online, typically PDF, and a printed mailed product voter guide. You can see some regional trends on the map. Voter guides originated in our western states, many of which have citizen-initiated ballot question processes. Many, but not all, Midwestern, Southern, and Eastern states do not offer voter guides. This bill would produce a voter guide in line with the red states on this map, a printed and mailed product along with an online companion PDF. Here are some examples of the cover pages for 6 states' voter guides. 5 of these states' guides are printed and mailed products with the exception of Utah. Some states call this product a pamphlet, some call it a guide, and while the terminology differs, the product is the same. In researching which candidates other states include in their guides, we found that most states struck a balance similar to what we are proposing in SF 4135. All general election candidates for federal office, statewide constitutional offices, state legislative offices, statewide judicial and district court judgeships will be included in the Minnesota guide. States' distribution methods do differ. Some states offer a single statewide edition of their guide. Some states offer a few regional editions, and yet other states offer one edition per Senate district, as in Arizona, for example. We have not specified a particular distribution model in this bill, as we feel further research and cost analysis is necessary to determine the most effective model. This proposal does not include local candidates, county, city, school board offices in this guide. However, we plan to develop a distribution model that preserves county lines in order to provide a future pathway for expansion of the guide to include local candidates. One model in particular that we're exploring is distribution by Minnesota Judicial District, because judicial districts both respect county lines and judicial candidates are included in the guide. We do believe that Minnesota voters would benefit from a printed and mailed guide. Broadband internet is still not a universal reality in Minnesota, and as you can see here, according to the governor's task force on broadband as of 2 years ago, approximately 12% of Minnesota households lack the speeds necessary to easily download and navigate this type of voter guide. This is approximately 280,000 households in Minnesota. As the bill is written, distribution of the printed and mailed guide would be sent to every household that contains at least one registered voter. Ultimately, we want to ensure that all eligible Minnesota voters will have easy access to a voter information guide. A printed and mailed product combined with an online companion would put us in a place to achieve that. And we're happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you, Madam Chair and members.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And then we also have Lily Sassy from We Choose Us. State your name for the record and go ahead with your testimony.
Hello, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Lily Sassy, and I'm the director of We Choose Us, a coalition of over 40 organizations dedicated to protecting and expanding our democracy, who in total represent over 1 million Minnesotans in membership. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of SF 4135, requiring the Secretary of State to produce a voter guide. We are proud of our status as the highest voter turnout state in the nation and our safe, secure, and accurate elections. But we also know that there's always more we can do to bring our elections into the 21st century. As we currently face attacks on our freedom to vote, we need ongoing reforms to make our system of voting more, not less, inclusive and accessible to everyone. A voter guide would be an important tool for strengthening Minnesota's tradition of high voter participation and civic engagement. I grew up in Oregon, a state that has a printed and mailed voter guide. My first experience of voting as an 18-year-old new voter was with a voter guide. It helped me feel more informed, seeing who I was voting for, what they stood for, who their endorsements were, and access to their official websites. It helped me feel more prepared, informed, and invested in the process. A clear, nonpartisan voter information guide helps ensure that eligible voters, regardless of zip code, income, age, or education level, have access to key election information, the same basic information about candidates and proposed constitutional amendments. We appreciate the voter guide outlined in this bill. We appreciate that it's comprehensive and would give voters all the basic information on procedures to register to vote. We also particularly appreciate the inclusion of information about college campuses and the name and contact information for vote coordinators, including candidate statements, information about any state constitutional amendment, and information about the Campaign Finance Board, and also making this guide available in both print and online in multiple languages to further promote accessibility for all Minnesota voters. And we would love to work with the Secretary of State to see if and how we can expand the number of languages. Other states that produce official information guides have shown that these materials can increase voter understanding of complex issues and improve confidence in the electoral process, just like it did for me at 18. A Minnesota-specific guide tailored to our laws and communities would build on that success and reinforce public trust in our elections. Given the current state of election misinformation, by centralizing this information in an official publication, the state can reduce confusion, combat misinformation, and help voters make informed choices based on accurate, neutral descriptions rather than partisan messaging. This guide could help encourage engagement and give voters the confidence that they are relying on accurate, this guide could help encourage engagement and give voters the confidence that they're relying on accurate information. Thank you so much for your work to protect and enhance Minnesota's election.
Thank you so much for your testimony. All right, are there any amendments that wish to be offered at this time? Senator Cran.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I would like to move, let's do the first one, move the A5 amendment to Senate File 4135.
All right, Senator Cran would like to move the A5 amendment. Is that in packets? Okay, that is in packets. And Senator Cran, have you had an opportunity to discuss this amendment with Senator Cwodzinski?
Madam Chair, we have not.
Okay. Senator Cwodzinski, have you had an opportunity to review the amendment?
I have.
And would you like to provide a response? Well, actually, I'm
Madam
sorry.
Chair,
I apologize. Sorry.
Give us time before you get to know.
I caught myself before you caught me. Senator Curran, would you
I want to
please like to
congratulate
share?
Senator Cwodzinski to try and rescue the timber industry in northern Minnesota on buying their appropriate legislative votes by cutting down lots of trees. But this amendment looks to add the integrity. We're doing another mailing to all households. And so much like we do, the only thing we do, or one of the very few things we do to ensure that eligible people reside on the statewide voter registration roll is we mail them out postcards. And so those that bounce back, our counties and everybody are required to address those and move them into the appropriate status, either challenged or inactive. And that's what this does. So any of those mailings that bounce back, they should be up for consideration or should be removed from the statewide voter registration system, or treated exactly as the postcards are treated as they bounce back today. And I urge green vote and request a roll call.
Thank you, Senator Cran. Again, I apologize for moving a little too fast here. Senator Cwodzinski.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Curran. There is no name from the Secretary of State's office. It's just the household, so there would be no reason to bounce back. But I'll let my testifiers address it in more detail.
Ms. Freeman, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Chair and Senator Curran. I'm Nicole Freeman, the Office of the Secretary of State. Yes, just exactly what Senator Cwodzinski said. I think the office is generally supportive of the provisions that we have in law right now that help make sure that the Minnesotans live where they say they live as they're registering to vote. But this way, the way that the bill is currently structured and it being mailed to the household of the where at least one registered voter lives, it's not going to have the voter's name. So if it was returned I think there's a question of, are we then challenging the whole house, and things like that. So that's, I think, where we're happy to keep, if Senator Cran would like to continue working, we can, brainstorm if there's another idea, but that specific provision doesn't quite work in this situation. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Senator Cran.
And so with that, I would like to still move forward that we could utilize, if we're going to incur the costs, and to be able to, one, inform, and I think protect democracy. Someday we'll get a bill that protects the republic we live within. I still think there's a way we can do that, and if we're going to incur those costs, and we're going to mail to every single household, I'm sure there's ways we can include the names, because I think you're including, well, I don't know what you're not including today going through the list, but it certainly is comprehensive in the information being sent out, voter application or voter registration applications, a whole host of things. I still think we can figure out a way to utilize the expense and also improve the integrity of our statewide voter registration database. And so I still encourage a yes vote.
Senator Cran, I actually have a quick question for you. It seems, so in discussing cost, if these items have to be returned, won't there be a cost for returning them? And if so, have you asked for any sort of a fiscal note on any additional cost beyond the one for the bill itself?
Madam Chair, we would love that the fiscal note would be a standard within this body, and we've seen that be eliminated.
Senator, it's just a question.
But I think it'd be a worthwhile cost. And so for those of you that are those that come back, it'd be a worthwhile cost to help us improve the voter rolls.
And just to clarify, the fiscal note for the underlying bill is in the packet, and I was just, my question was just whether or not we had any sense of what an additional cost would be.
Madam Chair, there's not a fiscal note as part of this.
Okay, thank you. Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a different question, but to that, I don't believe that a piece of mail that is returned, non-deliverable for certain reasons, is charged. Because I've mailed things out, and it bounces back to me if it's address not found or something like that. And I don't think there's ever a cost for that. My question for the author is, as the author's aware, a couple years ago, Democrats changed the law to enable additional voter fraud by not requiring an address, and people could just describe where they live. How would this voter guide be mailed out to some addresses, to some people, I guess, who don't necessarily have an address?
Ms. Freeman or
Madam Chair.
Mr. Rothstein?
Madam Chair, Senator Lucero, thank you for the question. The guide would only be mailed to households with an address that have a mailbox. So I think in the situation you're describing where someone can describe where they live on the voter registration application, I think there would be other ways for that person to have access to a voter guide, such as a public library or a college or university, for example.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And second question to the bill author. Well, wouldn't that be true then of anybody? So could we get away with just putting this into the public libraries or wherever your other alternatives are, instead of incurring the cost to send it to every household who likely isn't going to read it anyway if it's unrequested? Because I think the vast majority of us receive information, we're bombarded with not spam email, but spam snail mail. And we look at it for about 4 seconds as we walk from our mailbox to our trash can to throw it away. So perhaps we could, or I guess have you considered not mailing out to every address, but instead just some of the alternatives?
Senator Cwodzinski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I keep waiting for the we're not a democracy question from you, Senator Lucero. But with respect to the question you did just ask, oh my God, I was trying to be funny and I forgot what you just asked.
Would you consider the alternatives?
I guess I have more faith in the voter than maybe what you're suggesting, and in that this product isn't going to be a lit piece from a candidate that is going to be biased, and I just foresee something that over time, this is going to be something that a household's going to be all excited about receiving, and they're going to sit down with their children over the dinner. Okay, I know. They're going to be sitting down with their children over the dinner table, poring over the unbiased, objective, or non-objective, non-biased, bipartisan literature received to them from an office of the state of Minnesota. And I think it'll be something that every household, maybe someday, call it a utopian idea on my part, but that it'll be something that every Minnesota household will be excited to receive in the mail, and it won't have that 4 seconds of turning it over and tossing it into the recycling bin. But I appreciate that observation on your part, and I don't know if these two want to weigh in on it as well, but thank you.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, you baited me. So, Madam Chair, Senator Cwodzinski, would you be able to, as your testifier said, combat misinformation and to promote accurate information, admit we're a republic?
Madam Chair, are we on the amendment or the underlying bill?
We're on the amendment. Senator Lucero, seriously, you want him to answer that?
I'm very serious. One of his testifiers said he wants to combat misinformation and promote accurate information, and I want to see if he has the ability to do that.
Okay, Senator Cwodzinski.
Yeah, I'd love to engage with you, maybe off the record, back in the retiring room some morning or afternoon in the next month or two. I would enjoy that greatly. But for now, I think Senator Westland nailed it when in last meeting and on her closing remarks on, I remember when Reagan invaded Grenada and no one knew if it was Grenada or Grenada, and that's all the news agencies were talking about is what to call it. And I understand where you're coming from a republic point of view, but Aristotle defined 6 systems of government: monarchy, aristocracy, named it after himself, democracy, tyranny, oligarchy, and anarchy. And so in Aristotle's theory of government, there was no republic. It was a democracy defined as the people rule. So I understand why you want to call it a representative democracy, a republic. So I'm not going to argue with you. That's a legitimate, people call the United States a republic based on it being a Republican, representative democracy, or in other words, a republic. But it seems like for most Americans, we love the word democracy because it has stood the test of time. And so anyways, with that said, the retiring room, I'm all ears.
Okay, can we talk about do you have any questions about the amendment, Senator? Or any comments?
Well, Madam Chair, I had asked questions about the amendment, so.
Senator Lucero, I think the last one, I'm just trying to bring us back, and I was coming back to you to see if you had any additional questions that you would like. I think you read a little bit more into what I was saying than was actually intended, so I apologize if you misinterpreted me. I love the discussion, but I do want to try to get back to the amendment that we're at. So if you have some further comments or discussion, I'd love to hear it.
I had nothing more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a question for any of the testifiers, and maybe Ms. Freeman, because it was your comment about that there would not be names on this going out. And I guess my question would be, under this system and under this proposal, why not? If all that information is already readily available, and I think this is some of the frustration. We want to say, oh, we have a strong system, it's perfect. And then we say, well, how about make sure that this vulnerability doesn't get exploited, and we get the answer, well, we're not really set up to do something like that. That, I think, a cynical person can read a nefarious purpose into that. So I want to ask, why not have it where it's sent out to named addresses and be an extra catch in the system?
Ms. Freeman.
Thank you, Chair and Senator Matthews. I think that based on our assumptions as we were working through the fiscal note and pulling things together, we were looking at the costs for sending it out using a more bulk rate. And typically in those types of mailings, when you're sending it to multiple people within a household, the address field, or excuse me, yes, the address field is what moves forward and not necessarily the name. The name field is universal, like registered voter at the household, sort of a name field. And so that was our assumption as we were thinking about the costs related to this. As I said before, we certainly can look at other models, and would be happy to do that. I think it, you know, there's some locations where you might have a family that has adult children that still live at home. And, you know, you're having there's also like the practicality of including all those names on a mailing address and following USPS guidelines. So it's more so just about the assumption of how we would logistically get these out the door.
Senator Matthews, anything?
Madam Chair, then just after this amendment, just a quick follow-up, I would request you ask our council to go over the fiscal note and maybe do that before we finish the rest of the amendments as we weigh in on this bill.
Yep, why don't we get through the amendments and then we can do that. Any other, Senator Bolden?
I'll be very brief, Madam Chair. I wonder about the logistics of that. I will say there are 5 registered voters in my household. I don't know that you could list out all of those 5 names on a piece of mail to my house. Maybe you could, I just don't know, but it seems like a lot. There's space issues, so I would just add that to the conversation.
All right. Before I go to Senator Coran, Senator Cwodzinski, do you have any final comments on the amendment?
Thank you, Madam Chair, no.
Senator Coran, any final comments?
No, Madam Chair.
All right, so Senator Coran is moving the A5 amendment, and Ms. Stankiewicz will take the roll.
Senator Westland?
No.
Senator Coran?
Yes.
Senator Carlson?
No.
Senator Barr? Senator Bolden?
No.
Senator Cwodzinski?
Nope.
Senator Limmer? Senator Lucero? Senator Marty? Senator Matthews? Senator Port?
No.
There being 5 ayes and 6 nays, the motion is not adopted. Are there any additional amendments, Senator Coran?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to move the A4 amendment to Senate File 4135.
All right, and I believe that is in everyone's packets. Senator Coran, would you like to describe your amendment?
Yes, Madam Chair. And so this amendment looks at the portion for constitutional amendments that requires votes for and against be broken down by party. This would increase the transparency and actually lets the voters know if the measure was truly bipartisan in support, not just how many votes it received. And so same with this one. This was shared with your research and Democrat research prior to the hearing today. So I urge a green vote and request a roll call.
Senator Cwodzinski, have you had a chance to review the amendment?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Coran, good catch.
I take that you support this as a friendly amendment?
Yeah, it's a wise catch on his part. So
Madam
thank
Chair,
you.
with it, I'll retract the request for roll call.
Okay, thank you. Any comments on this, Senator Marty?
No, I guess, Madam Chair, I'm wondering, in other words, so in the ballot language, in the voter's guide, you'd have just a list of constitutional amendment to do such and such, and in the House, there'd be the 112 in favor, and then you'd have to say how many Democrats and how many Republicans and whatever, that's how you would do it? Okay. So in other words, it's not going to add a lot. We're not naming people, we're just giving by party. That's fine, yeah.
Senator Cran, is that?
Madam Chair and Senator Marty, yeah, I mean, we've got the totals. It's just a matter of who voted, and it's adding a single letter, right? Doesn't expand or change anything to the to the effort. So.
Okay. This seems to be a friendly amendment. I don't see any other discussion, so all those in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. The amendment is adopted. The A4 amendment is adopted. All right, are there any other amendments? Okay, so now we are going to move on to discussion on the bill itself. And this might be a good time. I know Senator Matthews was asking for a walkthrough of the fiscal note, so maybe this is a good time to do that. Introduce yourself for the record and go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Andrew Erickson, the fiscal analyst covering the committee. And we'll walk through the fiscal note. I'm probably just going to skip over the front page. People who've heard me do this before know that I think the front page is not always the most exciting part, and it's the stuff that's inside that really counts. So if you start on page 5, you'll start to see where the Secretary of State's office begins making their assumptions. And you'll see that they're largely around the printing and mailing costs that would accrue to the effort described in the bill. There's also some rulemaking that would be associated with the bill and printing in the state register. If you move on to page 6, you'll see those costs broken down so that the rulemaking costs for the Secretary of State in total are about $40,000. There's a hiring of four different individuals, 1 who would be full-time and 3 who are temporary staff. Those would total about $152,000. And then on the last little bold header there is the voter information guide, the printing and shipping, and this is where the bulk of the costs in the bill come from. And you'll see that those total $1.9 million.
Any questions for Mr. Erickson? Okay. Yes, Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Council, reading your exciting front page, then the assumption is the total cost of the bill is $2.82 million, correct?
Mr. Erickson.
Madam Chair and Senator Matthews, yes, I was eventually, I promised, going to get there. I thought I was also going to go through a couple of the other ones, but there are a couple other costs that are outside of the committee that are at the Office of Administrative Hearings. So I do promise that the grand finale was coming, and you're correct. What I would probably point out is that this is in anticipation of the first big voter guide coming out for the 28 election. So you'll see that the costs in that table are a little bit back shifted and don't occur uniformly.
Any further questions? Okay, on to discussing the bill now as amended. Senator Marty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I have several questions, mainly for Secretary of State's office. 53 days before an election is unusual. Could you explain how you pick that, how long it takes to mail, everything else?
Mr. Rothstein.
Madam Chair, Senator Marty, thank you. We chose that as 1 week preceding the 46-day early voting period, I believe is how we chose that 53-day timeline.
Senator Marty.
And Mr. Chair.
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry. Tired today. I guess the question is how long, first of all, just one more question about the mailing. How long does it take for these to go in other states? Because I used to think political mailing used to be red tagged or something, and they had to do it within a week or something, but recent years, it seems to me that sometimes it takes 2-3 weeks.
Mr. Rothstein.
Madam Chair, Senator Marty, excellent question. I can't answer that with the definitive precision, but this would likely be eligible for the official election mail stamp, which I would assume that this would arrive at someone's mailbox in 1 to 2 weeks' time.
Okay.
Senator Marty.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and a few other questions about it. One, Senator Cwodzinski, I didn't know you were working on a bill like this. I really think this is helpful, and I concur with you that the more information you give to voters, actually a lot more people are interested in it. They're not so much interested in a little card that attacks the opponent or even praises themselves, but when they have a lot of information there, I think it's nice. But I was kind of assuming when I first started reading this and looking at this that you were talking about online and other ways, and I guess Secretary of State's office, when people register to vote, I haven't registered for a long time, do you have email addresses for many voters or no?
Ms. Freeman?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator. I don't, it is a field. It's an optional field for folks to fill out, and I don't know off the top of my head how many emails, out of the 3.6 million registered voters that we have.
Senator Marty?
Because, Madam Chair, I was thinking, initial first step is to maybe get these things into place and do them online and so on. I like the idea of mailed because I think more people would actually pay attention and read them. And I know when I first ran, I put out lengthy issue papers on things and stuck summaries of them in a brochure I was carrying door to door. And you go down one side of the street, come back the other side, and some guys sitting in the summer, they'd be sitting on their porch stoop reading this stuff. And when you give voters just fluff, they get plenty of political fluff, but when you actually spend time talking to them and they can read through this, I think it helps. And I like it that you're including judges in here, because just a little poll at this end of the committee table, I think most of us think the number one question we get from neighbors the week before the election is, who should we vote for judge? And so I really like what you're doing here. I did have a question, and it's probably largely because you're doing a hard printed mailed copy. This 100 words per candidate, is that what other states do?
Can you cite the page number, please, and the line number?
Sure,
I think it's page 5.
Somewhere later in the bill, I think, yeah. Candidates, page 5, yeah, lines 20, 520, and.
Senator Cwodzinski? Or whom?
I don't think he asked a question yet, did he?
No, the question was, how did you, that seems awfully small amount of things. I think if you try to say what Senator Cwodzinski's for in 100 words, you're not going to accomplish a whole lot.
Wow.
Yeah, I was going to suggest we should switch the 300 with the president, and we go 300 and the president goes 100, but I think they might have a more intelligent response.
Mr. Rothstein?
Madam Chair, Senator Marty, excellent question. Other states do tend to have less real estate, shall we say, in terms of the word count for candidates lower on the ballot, but I think that's I think that those word limits are something that we're certainly open to conversation about.
Because, Madam Chair, again, my pitch with maybe the first thing we should try is online, but I'm not saying we should do that. I'm just saying that even if you're doing printed ones, having 2 versions, because online you can do so much more and so much more targeted to people. And I think if you have the printed one, people are more likely to look at the online one. But if you have it online, you don't need to have like 100 or 300 words. You might do 500 words, whatever people think is a reasonable amount. But I was wondering, because I think it'd be nice to have more detailed stuff available for people that could be online. And I'm sure that means the production costs go up. But just wanted to float those ideas. And then the final question I have for the Secretary of State's office is just looking at budgets this year and everything, and you would have this be set up whatever date this bill was effective. I haven't looked at that. But you'd have, it seems, a year to put these together for then. If we didn't pass something until next year, would you still be able to get something out by the 2028 election?
Ms. Freeman?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, I think that we're anticipating that there, would be work needing to be done in 2027 around rulemaking and creating the form and things like that. I do think that, yes, to answer your question, the effective date is set for January 1st, 2027 in this bill. But yes, I think we could, if it was passed in the middle of next year, could still get things underway to be ready for sort of the launch in May of 2028.
Okay. Madam Chair, I appreciate
Senator
that.
Marty.
And while I spoke against, said that maybe we start without a printed one, I think Ms. Sassy mentioned how, as a first-time voter, she saw these things, and I really do think there's a huge difference between something like this. I just think of city newsletters and other things that people get. I think they treat that different than things from some aluminum siding or siding sales pitch or roofing sales or political candidate card kind of thing. I think they pay more attention to things like these, and not 100% of voters do. A whole lot of them do what I think Senator Lucero said. They got 4 seconds to look at before they get it in the recycle bin or whatever. But I think a higher percentage than people realize do read them, and I think it helps push democracy. So I really like the idea of that. I just was curious, and I was just trying to figure out how long it takes to do it if we were to decide at some other time.
Okay, Senator Coran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to Senator Marty's point is, I kind of agree with you. You can't say much in 100 words, certainly none of us in this room. But I don't see an option. I think we could solve that problem and comfort candidates on all sides. So to have 2 versions, we could submit one for online or break it down, but wouldn't it just be better to include the website, carry over the website of the candidates? And so I think that would be a really good medium. So you give a really brief statement, right? We can talk about how amazing we are in a couple characters, and then provide the link online. It would be a hot link, as we do today in campaign finance. And in the printed, those that are interested can go out and find that information. So I just want to add from that particular point.
Thanks, Senator Coran. And you were on the list as well, just to speak.
Yes. So
go ahead.
And so, Madam Chair, and so I would like to take that in advisement. I think we could solve that piece of it. I also think when you talk about to make it meaningful, I think we really need to consider at a minimum the breakdown by Senate district, to make it regionally valuable. The size, just the pure size of it, being smaller, I think will get far greater opportunity to, the people they know closest in the district will know, we'll be able to more likely thumb through it instead of having 201 legislators and all the constitutional, all the congressional and all of them. It'll just become much too unmanageable. And then I think the read rate will go down. So those are just recommendations, but I like the constitutional amendment piece of it, because that's the piece. One, I hate constitutional amendments because you would never be able to inform the voters what it really is. And none of our most recents have been accurate in the description, and because citizens know so little. But how would we ever get even a long form statement to be accurate? The pros and cons, and so let's use the current, the one we just had, the environmental trust fund. We expanded from 5.5% to 7, and it sounded great. We didn't promise puppy dogs, but it was so incomplete on its actual impact, the positives and the negatives. And how will we ever get that? Because in this case, it's like we spent more, but the money wasn't required to go to projects, clean air, clean water. It directed a new committee that removes the legislature from deciding where those dollars go. And that was a fairly straightforward one, but they probably take good 4 pages to describe it. How would we ensure that the positives and the negatives based on what it is, and who determines what's positive and what's negative? So you can understand, to be really informative, it would have to be comprehensive, and I would go back to, it would almost have to be equally partisan, not nonpartisan, because that doesn't exist. I've never seen it exist. So somehow it has to be described as and I think the court administrative hearings, the theory is they could be, but that's the part I don't see anything in here. How would we define that to be effective? Because it's drastically needed. It really is. But to lay out its impact, and the entire impact relative to the environment today, because we're using constitutional amendments as kind of referendum. And so citizens only vote for their own self-interest without, that's why we have legislators here to govern over time. Things change. And so if we're going to have constitutional amendments, how would we do that?
Ms. Freeman? Mr. Rothstein?
Madam Chair, Senator Coran, that's a great question, and that's something we've
I
struggled.
figured it was, I asked it.
Of course. You know, the language from that section comes from some of those western states that I mentioned that have citizen-initiated ballot question processes that we don't have. And in most of these states, there's a very official committee, like a campaign committee for, and there's a very official campaign committee against. And they submit their arguments and their statements, and they're published in that way. We don't quite have that analog, and I think, Senator Cran, we would be very open to exploring with you what that analog could be, and what scrupulously nonpartisan office or person would be able to write those statements.
Madam Chair.
Senator Cran.
And so I think you described the equally partisan process which the others use for referendum. And there's really no difference to what we're using a constitutional amendment for. Because almost everything we talk about, it's not a constitutional amendment or a foundational element of governing, just what we choose to add. And by the way, it strips each citizen of their representation over time, right? It's a horrible use of it, but if we do use it, I think we have to follow something in that arena that you have be able to articulate the pros and the cons, and it's from a variety of them, 3 or 4 different views actually, right? Because there's not just Republicans and Democrats, or there's 4 versions within each subcategory. But we would have to do that in order to be effective, because then whoever's in power, right? How do both sides and all sides feel comforted that it is truly accurate and its positives and negatives from multiple viewpoints, and let the voter decide. Madam Chair, at this point, I don't have any further questions. I'm sure others have plenty. And the forest industry would again like to thank Senator Cwodzinski.
Thanks, Senator Cran. So up next, we have Senator Port.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Cwodzinski, I really appreciate you bringing this bill. I have friends who live out west that get these guides, and they love them. And for some of them, I think particularly like the judicial space is actual information that is really incredibly hard to find any other way. But they do ballot questions differently out in California. So for them, it's like a really necessary piece, because sometimes there are 20 or 30 on a ballot, which is a lot. And so I think that piece is like, the more information we can give to voters, the better we are. As you were describing, like, your hope for what this could be in the future around the dining room table, like, that's literally how my family votes. We have started voting by mail since the pandemic, and I got sick, and it got to the point where I was worried if I could make it on election day. So I wanted to vote early, and we started, like, my husband and I started, sitting down with a computer. We can go through each thing together. We can talk about it. We can vote. We can, look up people's websites, find out as much information as we can. And our kids are young enough that they still think it's cool to sit with us and do that. And I think, like, this could be such an incredible educational tool. It could be a real engagement tool. I think it's a really important idea. I know there's gonna be lots of talk about where we should spend our money this cycle, this year. I think this is a really worthy idea, and I hope you keep fighting for it through this cycle.
Thank you, Senator Port. Up next, Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple questions. The first I would have is, I guess, going back to, I think it was Senator Curran's questioning So the guide, is it going to be comprehensive? So the guide is it one guide for the entire state? So is it the list of all elected offices for state representative, senator, et cetera? That's going to every Senate district in the state?
Mr. Rothstein.
Madam Chair, Senator Lucero, we haven't yet made that determination. We haven't specified that in here because we'd like to explore the cost options more. There are some states that do a statewide guide. There are some states in Alaska, they have 5 regions for their elections division. They send it by region. And in Arizona, they have 30 Senate districts. I think the challenge with Senate districts is we do have the largest upper chamber in the country. And it might not be cost effective to send it at that level, but I think that's something that we would want to explore.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so then when does that decision get made? Who's making that decision? And can you show me in the bill where that decision and how that decision is going to be made once it passes out of this committee?
Ms. Freeman.
Thank you, thank you, Chair and Senator Lucero. I think that that decision would be made in rulemaking, would be my guess. That it is not specified how exactly it would be distributed in the bill. It's certainly something that we could, if the legislature wishes to dictate that more firmly, we definitely, that could be added to the bill. But right now, it would be something that most likely would be dealt with in rulemaking, as other details about other formatting things might be included in that too.
And this is going to state and local next because of the rulemaking. Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to Senator Cwodzinski. Then, are you comfortable with that? Because what I'm thinking is, let's just say there is, to be specific, are you comfortable delegating that to the Secretary of State through rulemaking rather than being prescriptive? Because in the scenario that you have 100 words for every, you're talking 201 times at least 2 likely, and possibly, other candidates as well. I mean, can you imagine how thick that's going to be going to so the fiscal note that we have here, it's going to probably be 5 times that.
Senator Cwodzinski.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Lucero, and I do agree. I was under the impression that this was going to be more local. I don't know if it'd be based on congressional district or whatever, but to have, this thick, with 201, as you alluded to, 201, 100-word packets. And so that's something we need to talk about. And I don't know where I do defer that the Secretary of State's office, I have faith in them, regardless, of the election, the party that's, it's sitting in there, and that they'll do the right thing, given that it'll be a nonpartisan thing. But I am pausing right now, realizing that I just can't imagine people sitting down going over 201 legislative races when all they really are interested in is their particular legislative race and maybe neighboring districts as well. So maybe and this is a topic we'll have between now and state and local government, but to your point, maybe do it based on congressional districts.
Mr. Rothstein, did you want to add something to that?
But thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator.
If I may, Madam Chair. Senator Lucero, excellent question. The states that do have statewide guides tend to be California, where it's really statewide proposition questions like Senator Port was mentioning. I did mention in the presentation and just wanted to re-highlight, we are exploring distribution by judicial district because judges are included in the guide and because judicial districts respect county lines. So it would be sort of maybe a clean way to do it, but I appreciate your question. Thank you.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have a few more questions. But to that, it wouldn't be just 201. There'd be 201 offices. And then assuming that every one of those 201 have let's just say a Republican and Democrat, you're talking 402, right? At 402, potentially 100-word statements, right? And then if you have other candidate parties as well. So Okay, the next question, I'm looking at line 2.1. And it says, well, flipping back over to the first page, it's at the bottom, it says, the guide must, to the extent reasonably practicable, and then on line 2.1, be written in English and the three most commonly spoken non-English languages as determined by the state demographer. So is it the expectation then that the hard copy is going to be published in 4 languages?
Mr. Rothstein.
Madam Chair, Senator Lucero, we could have been more specific in the drafting there. The intention here is for the guide to be sent, the printed guide to be sent in English, and for there to be an English supplement and the 3 most commonly spoken non-English languages online. That was the intent of that line.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, and so what I would, yes, I am not comfortable the way it's written here because of its lack of specificity and because we're just delegating, rulemaking to the Secretary of State, that may not be how it's interpreted potentially. So you could get even larger. So just another suggestion, going back to the 100-word statements, perhaps since you're going to have both a hard copy version and a digital copy version, perhaps you don't have any of the candidate statements in the hard copy. Maybe it's just a list of the candidates and their party and the office, and then the digital copy would have the candidate statements. And therefore, you might be able to defray some of those costs. Then the next question I have, down on line 2.9 and 2.10, excuse me. The Secretary of State may prepare a recording of the voter information guide. Can you describe what that means?
Mr. Rothstein.
Madam Chair, Senator Lucero, thank you. The intention was either an audio or a video recording.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what does that mean? So it would be, let's just say it'd be like an audio book, like somebody reading this office, this is the candidate, this office, this is the candidate. I'm just trying to understand what that means and what's the intent behind this.
Ms. Freeman.
Thank you, Senator, or Chair Westland and Senator Lucero. I think the intent behind it is from an accessibility perspective, so that someone could access it, not only via a screen reader, but also that there would be a human voice read material that would be available. So from an accessibility standpoint, that would be the reason for the audio version of the guide to be available. And I think depending on, there's a lot of different ways you could do that with an online version, right? And make it so you're not having to read, someone is not listening to 2 hours of names being rattled off and instead could navigate it in different ways.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and appreciate that. So I'm sure most legislators are probably familiar, I'm not going to say his whole name, but Mr. H., who often is advocating for the deaf and the blind. I see here then it's obviously specific for an audio, meaning I'm assuming obviously blind, but I don't see any specific provisions in here for then deaf or other accessibility. Do you have any considerations on other accessibility issues beyond just an audio recording?
Mr. Rothstein.
Madam Chair, Senator Lucero, thank you. I think we'd be very open to conversation with advocates on that and the Disability Council and others, and in terms of adding additional provisions for other Minnesotans with disabilities.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Chair, I have other questions, but I'll just stop right there. I think given the concerns I have with some of this language, I don't think it's ready to leave the committee. I'm not going to make a motion to table it, but I'm just throwing it out there for the author. I think some of these probably should be answered from an election committee standpoint before it leaves this committee. So just something for you to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Bolden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Cwodzinski, for bringing this bill. I very much appreciate this idea. I think as much as we can do to get information to voters, I think it is useful in a time when we live in this sort of information overload, but it's difficult sometimes to sort of sort through, where should I be looking? What is real? Whose spin is this, giving me? Having a nonpartisan in one place, set of information, I think would be very, very useful for voters. And I, like Senator Port, what you sort of described is also what happens at my house. When my kids got to be old enough, especially the first time they are voting, I go to the Secretary of State website and print out a sample ballot, and we sat at the kitchen table and walked through it and looked at websites and talked about issues and go through that process of like, how do you know who you want to vote for? And so this guide would have made that process easier in terms of, having the information before us and knowing where to look. And so I appreciate you bringing this and I'm happy to support it moving forward. There are certainly, perhaps more questions and things to work out, but I think the idea is sound and a really good idea. The only other thing I would add is, aside from the candidate submitted information, just like the information that is being provided, to maybe think about having it be specified to be in plain English, to be sure that it is, accessible for as many people as possible. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bolden. Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Cwodzinski, you started out this conversation talking about the demise of newspapers. But newspapers are being replaced. You've got online services, you've got Facebook, you've got X, you've got all of the other Instagram functions. I think we have more political messages in a campaign year than ever before. And matter of fact, when I'm out on a campaign field, I get people complaining to me, can you stop the political messages coming? So I'm not sure if I buy into the idea that the citizenry is completely devoid of political message where they can make a decision based now on a government printed publication that's overseen by a politically endorsed candidate who might be Secretary of State. And so I'm a little concerned why we think government has to assume that the public doesn't know anything about what goes on in the political realm when they have so many different opportunities to gather information. So I have to just question the premise of why we think that is the case. In particular, I'm kind of curious about how big a document this is going to be when we include judicial candidates. You might remember the Hennepin County area has the largest judicial district in the state. We fill up a ballot, the back page of a ballot, bigger than this, with row after row after row of judicial candidates, and now we want them all to make a comment within a certain number of words. And usually that list is a list of singular judges that have no opponent. So if we did have an opponent for each one, you'll need another page just for the ballots, and let alone a voter guide. So I'm all for more information for voters, but do we really want to continue spending more government money on voter guides run by, for lack of a better term, a political class that's going to be dispersing it out at the expense of the taxpayer when there's so many other political messages out already? So I'm just kind of trying to roll this around in my head. Is it really necessary if it's only predicated on the demise of newspapers? Just a comment.
Thank you, Senator Limmer. I would interject that I think there's a lot of political noise out there, but I think there's a real lack of real political information for voters, or like real information. And I think that there's a difference between the two, and I wish we had a little less political noise and some actual dialogue and information for folks. Senator Barr, you're up next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah. How about we start with this question? How do you make a nonpartisan statement when the candidate's running for a partisan office?
Mr. Rothstein, Senator Cwodzinski, who would like to take that one?
Well, if you're going to write only 100 words, I think it's possible for one to write a very nonpartisan, it's a good question, but what you believe in. And so not specific issues, but the overriding grand scheme to improve this state and this country. And I don't know why that would have to be partisan. You're not really maybe addressing, this is my view on gun control, school prayer, death penalty, and abortion, but this is how I think I can improve this great state. And I'm not gonna, and back to, I appreciate Senator Limmer's comments about information overload, but one thing I do have to disagree with what he said is I don't think people are disgusted or tired of information. I hope I never hear that people are tired of information. That's what makes our species unique, is the plethora of information received. What voters are frustrated with is the amount of negativity and mudslinging and all the attack ads that aren't saying anything about what you're going to do if I am elected. But I do appreciate, as always, your wisdom, and it's a great question, and I think that might be for a political philosophy class at the University of Minnesota. But I did the best I could in answering it, unless my testifiers want to add anything. Thank you.
Okay, Senator Barr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, correct me if I'm wrong, so the candidate will be writing their 100 words to be submitted?
Mr. Rothstein.
Madam Chair, Senator Barr, yes, that is the intention.
Senator Barr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if I was writing mine and I have 100 words, I would write something like constitutional conservative. I recognize that we're a republic according to Article 4, Section 4 of the Federal Compact. And the difference between a democracy and a republic or something like that would be my 100 words. And the limiting fact, I would try and dial that into 100 words, but that's a very partisan statement. And then my other question is, you could very easily create more space in this by eliminating the picture. Because the picture doesn't tell me anything about how the candidate will be voting. It doesn't tell me anything about how I will be represented. The picture is, if I put you can put a pretty face and draw, it's good for any good political advisor will tell you the prettier your picture, the nicer your picture, the more votes you will get. So, and as an example, and I'm sure you're well aware of this one, if television would have been around in 1932, FDR never would have been elected. So to that point is, maybe we can create some more space in this by simply eliminating the picture, or at least at a minimum, only having the picture on the online version.
Mr. Rothstein.
Madam Chair, Senator Barr, I think that's certainly a suggestion we're open to exploring. Thank you.
Senator Barr.
Thank you, Madam Chair, but I will save all of my conversation about Aristotle and his 6 forms of government for the retiring room, where I'm sure we will have a very extremely robust conversation.
And Madam Chair, thank you for indulging.
Senator Cwodzinski.
Thank you. I just want to add about your comment about FDR's appearance. You've obviously never seen a picture of Herbert Hoover, so.
So when you have this conversation.
I hope his grandchildren are in the audience.
When you do have the conversation, I will bring treats. We could have like this whole forum and debate of discussion. I think that'd be great.
Yes, Madam Chair, since we're down to about 15 minutes left in committee time, we can have this conversation over cupcakes in the retiring room.
Well, you know I do like to bake. I have Senator Marty and Senator Lucero. You are going to have the last word. Senator Marty.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I do agree that I'm glad you're taking notes of what you're hearing for ideas and so on. I think Senator Westman made, or said, or Senator Limmer did a point I was going to make. Wouldn't go by judicial districts. Hennepin County is a fourth of the state. Just the legislators in that are going to be 50 districts compared to 150 in others. Some of the ones would have literally a fifth or a 10th or 20th as much as Hennepin County's one. So I would not do it by judicial districts, just so you have more equal population, maybe congressional districts. And I think I would specify in here that the candidate shall or may or something include links to their website, because that's something I think most candidates would if you don't do it, but I think it should be there. And Senator Barr was going to say, when you're saying it's nonpartisan in terms of the brochure, the pamphlet, but you as a candidate and your opponent get to say what they want to say about themselves, and that's very partisan, we'd expect. And I'm assuming, and I had one sort of question about the constitutional amendment language, you say that you basically have show what's stricken or what's added to the Constitution. At the bottom, the line 18 on page 4, you say the full text of the measure. Is that going to include if the constitutional amendment passes, this is how we will amend statute, which sometimes the legislature does, sometimes it doesn't. Is that what you mean by the full text of the measure?
Mr. Rothstein.
Madam Chair, Senator Marty, yes. If that language was included in the statute that was passed, it would be included. If it wasn't included in the statute, we would anyways write some kind of explanation to that effect using the procedures outlined in lines 4 through 11 on page 4.
Okay.
Senator Marty.
Because I think that's one, Madam Chair, where some could say, I think what you're saying on 4 through 11 is non-partisan. You're just simply reporting what's in the amendment. If whoever is writing, here's what this amendment does, that's when you get to the partisan troubles. But overall, I think there's a lot of questions yet, but I think this is really worth pursuing. And I think it's one of the other ones I'd make is your recommendations is to have what I think several of us suggested, a more in-depth one that's online. But it's a good project, and I appreciate your working on it and hope you keep doing so.
All right, Senator Lucero, I think you're our last person.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and something between the exchange of Senator Barr and Senator Cwodzinski. Could you just repeat again? I want to make sure I understood. So you mentioned like abortion, gun control, capital punishment, whatever you mentioned there. To not, did I hear you correctly? To not, a candidate, I just want to make sure you're hearing me. A candidate can draft their 100-word statement without mentioning those things, but instead be a higher level philosophy of their worldview or how they're going to benefit the state. Could you just repeat that part again? I want to make sure.
The candidate.
Senator Cwodzinski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Lucero. The candidate crafts their 100 words, correct? I'm just envisioning a world where the 100 words are noble and not just about the issue. I mean, I think Senator Barr, kind of the words he used to elevate the dialogue and discussion and debate of well, Mom, I don't even know what these words mean. Well, let's sit down and discuss what the big words that Senator Barr used. And I'm just envisioning a utopian society where some of you mentioned that sitting around at the dinner table and getting out the voter guide and discussing in an intelligent, reasoned manner without throwing things up in the air and saying these people are disgusting, the senators, and so anyways, I don't know if I answered your question in there, but.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, what I'm concerned about is somebody has to be the decider. There has to be an editor or a decision would have to be rendered. So when I'm looking at the, let's see, page 6, if in the opinion of the Secretary of State, any candidate statement submitted for inclusion in the voter guide is obscene or contains a matter that is otherwise prohibited by law from distribution. it'll go then, the secretary would appeal then to the Minnesota Court of Administrative Hearings. Can you describe who makes up that body and how does one get onto that body?
Ms. Freeman?
Thank you, Chair and Senator Lucero. Are you asking who makes up the Court of Administrative Hearings?
Senator Lucero?
I'm sorry, not individuals. I meant more like title, roles or offices, or what is this body and who is it comprised of?
Ms. Freeman?
Thank you, Chair and Senator Lucero. It is a group of judges that are appointed, I believe. I think the goal here was what we've heard from other states in our research and conversation is that for the most part, there are no edits that are needed. There is nothing remotely questionable that is submitted, but there are rare occasions where wild things are submitted. And so in looking at processes that other states have, this was sort of our way to, the Court of Administrative Hearings, participates in other campaign finance matters and campaign conduct matters. And so we thought that would be the appropriate body to make the determination if something rises to the level of obscene or prohibited.
Senator Lucero?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so I would direct members' attention to line 6.16, where it says the argument or statement can be rejected for publication or edited. And so here you have this subdivision too. It begins with, in the opinion of the Secretary of State, and then it's going to involve this Minnesota Court of Administrative Hearings, which is a group of appointed judges from what I hear. Well, in the state of Minnesota, the last 16 years have been Democrat governors making the appointments of judicial officers. So then I'm by natural extension assuming that this Minnesota Court of Administrative Hearings, if it's comprised of judges, they're going to likely be Democrat appointees. So in the current scenario, you have a Democrat Secretary of State in their opinion, and then it's going to be involving this body of Democrat judges. And they're empowered per the language in the bill to make edits. I am not comfortable with this at all. This does not seem bipartisan, nonpartisan, and there is a lot of latitude in here that in the partisan or prohibited or however you want to describe it is in the eye of the beholder. And this to me is just not comfortable language. Furthering my earlier comments that I don't think this bill is ready for prime time. I don't think this should move out of this committee at this time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Lucero. We are trying to get some information on this point. My understanding, and I know Ms. Stengel is looking as well, but my understanding is that the chief administrative law judge is appointed for a 6-year term with Senate consent. And then my understanding is then the chief judge can appoint additional administrative law judges. The most recent chief administrative law judge was Eric Lippman, who was an appointee of the former Kiffmeyer, Secretary Kiffmeyer. So that's what I know about it, and I don't know if Ms. Stengel is whispering that's what she's finding as well. So the chief justice, or the chief judge, does have to be confirmed and approved by the Senate. And then that person approves the ALJs after that. So I appreciate your final comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And then maybe it'd be for council. So there's a lot of commissioners now that are able to operate without having affirmative confirmation by the Senate. Would this be one of those roles that does not need confirmation by the Senate?
Go ahead, Ms. Stengel.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Lucero. I am not sure. The statute does require advice and consent of the Senate. Hang on 1 second here. I do know that this bill is going to go to State Gov next, where they do handle this sort of issue, and they have jurisdiction over the Court of Administrative Appeals, or Court of Administrative Hearings, so it's something they can discuss there as well.
Thank you, Senator Lucero.
And so just anybody watching this, so they understand what we're even discussing here, is that when it comes to confirmation, statute can say that a particular officer, commissioner, or in fact, today's, there was on the agenda of the Senate floor was the confirmation of a Met Council or Metropolitan Council appointee. But in the event that they're not affirmatively confirmed by the Senate, they will just go on to automatically be confirmed. And so that was, for anybody watching, that's what I'm asking here is there can be, in statute it says you need consent by the Senate, but not necessarily anymore because the law was recently changed. They'll just be automatically confirmed if never brought up for confirmation hearings in the Senate. So again, there's a lot of room here for potential manipulation and decision-making that can in and of itself lack the checks and balances. So thank you again, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and I don't want to beat this dead horse because I do know it is going to state and local after this, but again, my understanding is if the Senate does not confirm the nominee, that nominee cannot officially assume the role. So I don't know if that helps, but again, I think state and local probably is able to answer some of these questions better. I do appreciate this bill and this conversation.
Madam Chair?
Sorry.
Could I, two quick statements just before it moves out of this committee?
Sure.
So I think Senator Cwodzinski, I think we have to seriously consider if you're going to move forward with this on 121, the time frame for which this, when you describe when the description of the mailing methodology and when it might be delivered, right today it's 54 days, I think 53 days before the end of election season day. Voting starts 6 days, right? So it will be mailed out. Voting would already have started 6 days, and there's not a chance that anybody will get that ballot mailed to their home. So if we're going to do it, it should be, I think it should be, yeah, I think it's stated here, but I mean, we got 46 days when the beginning of election season starts, and to have it mailed out 6 days prior to that, the chance, or 7 days prior to that, 1 week, I think you got to back it up to, and actually seriously consider 67 days. So there's at least 3 weeks. Everybody has it in hands before any voting starts. So that's all, just a comment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Senator Coran, and thank you everyone again for the very thoughtful discussion. Senator Cwodzinski, thank you for bringing this bill forward, and I appreciate our testifiers for being here today in support of Senator Cwodzinski's bill. So, Senator Cwodzinski moves that Senate File 4135, as amended, be recommended to pass and referred to the Committee on State and Local Government. There is a roll call vote, and Ms. Stankiewicz will take the roll.
Senator Westland?
Aye.
Senator Coran?
Yes.
Senator Carlson?
Yes.
Senator Barr? No. Senator Bolden?
Aye.
Senator Cwodzinski?
Yep.
Senator Limmer?
No.
Senator Lucero?
No.
Senator Marty? Senator Matthews?
No.
Senator Port?
Yes.
Thank you. There being 7 ayes and 4 nays, Senate File 4135 as amended is recommended to pass and is referred to the Committee on State and Local Government. And that does conclude our agenda for today, so this hearing is adjourned.